Me too. Consistency is good. Well, good morning, It's the 25th day of legislative session, and was glad to see the critical race theory bills that I had brought forward, banning it in our K-12 system and universities, that it passed the House. Looking forward to that debate over in the Senate, and then also the bill that I brought regarding vaccine exemptions passed the Senate with very wide margins, which was good to see. And we'll see how that goes over in the House as that debate is going forward. So next week is crossover day. I'm sure the legislators talked about that quite a bit. There's a lot on their agendas and a lot to deal with, and we're looking forward to the final 3 weeks of session. With that, I'll turn it over to you guys and your questions.
Governor Austin Goss, Dakota News Now. The critical race theory bill that you just brought up, that is now making its way to the Senate. Had critical race theory struck from the text of the bill as well as the title. Are you satisfied with that bill still? Do you feel like it's a critical race theory bill still? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the amendments that were made dealt with the action civics portions of the bill. We do still support the bill. We think it's important that we make sure that none of our students are taught racism through an agenda of division, which, inherently what's happening across the country in a lot of these school districts or in curriculums is that people are being taught that someone is better than someone else based on their race, their sex, or their color, or that they're guilty of something that their ancestors perpetuated. So we don't want our kids learning that kind of lessons in our school systems, and that's why these bills still have my support.
Governor, sure. After the Supreme Court struck down the amendment that would have legalized marijuana in November, you released a statement that said, it's important to do things the right way. I'm wondering, is there a right way to legalize pot in your view in South Dakota?
Well, I've always for years been supportive of medical marijuana. Even when I was back in Congress, I felt that that would be appropriate if done correctly. People need to know what they're putting in their bodies, and I wanted it to be FDA regulated and something that was an option for people who had health conditions. It didn't happen that way in South Dakota. I've never been supportive of recreational marijuana. That's a debate that people in South Dakota are having, and there are some pieces of legislation that address that as well. We'll see what it looks like, but from my understanding, we basically already have recreational marijuana in South Dakota. From what I understand is going on in some of our tribal lands, people can walk into a casino or facilities and purchase a prescription from a doctor and go get in line and get marijuana. So I think it'd be important that when we have programs and medical programs that we make sure it has integrity, it's doing what we intended it to do, and that we understand the long-term consequences of the way these programs are stood up. So I wanted our medical program to look very different than it does today. I'm committed to having the best run medical program in the country, and so I would like to see some reforms to that program. I think what's happening in some of these areas with people just basically purchasing marijuana by manipulating the system isn't correct.
There's a few bills that would set up a taxation scheme to tax recreational marijuana if it's legalized. Would you support those? Do you think it's important that lawmakers and yourself address this ahead of the November election?
I think that there's recreational bills that are here in the legislature which may be could be improved, and so we're talking about that. I would like to see some reforms to the medical program. Focusing there would be important, and when we do have something that passes on the ballot, that we make sure we look at what that language is and that we make sure that it is something that has integrity.
Do you think that recreational will pass in November?
I don't know if it will or not. I think that the more people are learning about marijuana and seeing it in our communities, that they'll make that determination. So I'm not certain if it will or not. Austin?
Just kind of following up on that question and the taxation bill on recreational marijuana specifically. Looking back on this medical marijuana rollout, it seems like it was a bit discombobulated at times. I think that's a statement you'd agree with. Do you think it's good for lawmakers to be proactive with bills like that and setting up the taxation system, or would you rather them wait and see what happens with marijuana in November?
Well, I think any program should pay for itself. So the fact that they're looking at the fact that this will cost the state money and it'll cost counties and communities money, it's really hard to put a number on what the true costs are. There'll be mental health needs. There'll be more people on programs that support families. There'll be counseling and addiction, law enforcement challenges. So you know, it should have a system to where it pays for itself. What that looks like today, I don't think anybody really has locked down.
Are you comfortable with the revenue projections that the Appropriations Committee set earlier this week?
I am not comfortable with what the revenue projections are. I'm encouraging them to be more realistic in what we could see in our future. If you look at the inflation costs across the country and goods and supplies that are increasing every day for families here in South Dakota, we recognize that our economy is not going to be able to stay as strong as it is right now today. We're going to do all we can to make wise decisions to budget for the future, recognizing the challenges we have in front of us.
So if a bill to roll back the half penny or 0.5% sales tax reached your desk, is that something that you would support?
You know, we'll have to see what the debate is as far as, you know, I've recommended tax decreases, and repealing taxes is always something that I'm supportive of if it's appropriate and it doesn't make sure that we're back here 2 years from now raising taxes to try to fill budget gaps. Yes, Austin.
Governor, during during the only Democratic press conference this morning, Senator Nezabus was talking about inflation and said that sometimes it can be a good thing. I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on the current inflation rates, and et cetera.
Well, I'd like to hear him explain that to a lot of the families in South Dakota. I've talked to people all over the state this week, spent some time with folks in Watertown that were telling me that gas went up 15 cents overnight in Watertown this week. Families who went grocery shopping got up to the checkout line and were shocked. That used to be that $300 would fill up their entire cart, and now it wasn't half full before they reached that threshold. So the reality of the inflation that we're seeing because of Biden's tax and over-regulation and the decisions that are being made at the federal level and how they're impacting South Dakota are devastating. And, you know, I can't find anybody in the state yet that has sat with me and talked to me and told me that this inflation is a good thing.
Governor, this is more of a campaign question as well.
Sure.
So you often champion South Dakotans around the country, and yet, you know, present staff included, a lot of your folks come from out of state, right? Ohio, New Jersey, Texas. So why are we hiring out of staters instead of South Dakotans for these important jobs?
Because these people wanted to come here and be a part of South Dakota. They were thrilled. I have more people that work for me that grew up here, but I don't think in South Dakota we've ever prioritized people over another based on where they were born. I'm thankful that people recognized what was happening here in South Dakota, our protection of their freedoms, and they came here and wanted to be a part of it.
Your vaccine exemption bill passed the Senate. Yesterday in House State Affairs, there was another vaccine exemption bill that would have put broader, I think, you know, conscience objections to it. Would you support that bill, or is there a compromise to be found between those two?
Well, that bill's still moving through the process, so we'll see what the language looks like. It's hard to project what that'll be, but from my understanding, that bill has verbal agreements in it, which would be incredibly hard for people to document and for businesses to document. Yep, Austin.
Governor, I don't know if you followed it this morning, but the House Health and Human Services Committee had a bill that would ban the medication used in medicinal abortions, but writ large in South Dakota. That was brought by Representative Steve Haugard, who you're familiar with. I don't know if you followed that bill or have seen that bill, but obviously, in a certain sense, it goes a step farther than the legislation you've brought. Just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on it.
Well, it does, because it completely bans those prescription drugs that are available to women across the state, which I think is wrong. That is not at all what the intention of the measures that I've championed, which is just not making telemedicine, chemical abortions more available over the internet or over the phone with strangers. What he's doing is banning those drugs altogether, and that could be detrimental to women who are going through very different situations. You know, his bills, I don't know what he's trying to do with his pro-life bills. I think he's trying to just draft policy to be more conservative than me because he's running for governor, but he's writing very, very bad policy. One of his first bills he filed would have made it much more prevalent for people to get abortions in the state of South Dakota. It said that any doctor, even though they worked for a system that had a policy on restricting the amount of abortions or the kind of abortions that could be done, he gave that doctor the freedom to conduct an abortion and disregard what the policy would be. There would have been many, many more abortions in the state of South Dakota if Steve Haugard's bill had passed and been signed into law, and that doesn't sound very pro-life to me.
There's been a dispute in the House over authorization to expend federal funds that come into the
Yes,
state.
there has been.
There was a suggestion by the House Majority Leader, Kent Peterson, that would probably be settled by a judge. Would you welcome that? Would you request an opinion from the Supreme Court? Would you welcome a lawsuit that would kind of settle that dispute?
You know, the majority leader and the leadership in the House can do what they choose to do. The fact is that they gave me this authority last year. Those bills would ensure that we have a full-time legislature and that it would give the Appropriations Committee incredible power that they've never had before in the history of South Dakota. For 133 years, we've had our budgeting process. Every governor has done exactly what I have done, and what they are deciding is to change the rules and to change the process and to take unprecedented power and give it to the Appropriations Committee, which is a very small part of the legislature and would ensure that they would be a full-time legislature. I think it's important to look at across the country, there's only 6, maybe 7 legislatures that are full-time. And for South Dakota to say that we need a full-time legislature seems unrealistic to me, in considering the size of our state and our population. It's, that what they do is what they will do, and I understand it, but they are treating this process very differently than it's ever been treated before.
Do you think it's, they would describe it as a check on the executive branch. Do you see it as a power grab?
They've always been a check on the executive branch, and when I was in the legislature, I appreciated that too. That's what the legislature is. We're 3 separate branches of government. They have incredible authority to go forward and to appropriate state dollars. Then they've always given federal expenditure authority to governors to make sure that federal grants get out on time, and to do that. They give us the authority, then they appropriate the state dollars. They're changing that process now to say they can go back and open up previous authority, draw it back, and then appropriate it in a very different manner that's ever been done before.
Governor, last week, last Thursday during the daycare grant kerfuffle, you put out a statement about the Attorney General's unofficial opinion on the daycare grants. And in that opinion, or in your statement, you basically said that he has the inability to weigh in on this. I just wanted to see if you follow up on that, or if you have anything more to say, or how you think his job is impeded upon in day-to-day functions.
Well, it's completely inappropriate for him to weigh in situations that are discussions between myself and the legislature. He obviously isn't objective, and he's not able to give an opinion that doesn't have a slant towards opposing me. So it was inappropriate for him to do that. He should recognize that himself and let someone else give that opinion.
A bill that passed the House this week dealt with making sure that pasture above a certain elevation remained grassland and wasn't redesignated as cropland based on soil type. What are your thoughts maybe on that legislation, or at least that idea thus far, and do you support it and hope the Senate passes?
Well, I'm not in favor of that piece of legislation the way it's written today. I know that it'll still move through the process, but I'm not in favor of raising taxes on people, especially when we've got an unknown future ahead of us. That bill specifically creates a shift. It does give some relief from some ranchers, but it raises taxes on all the other ag land in the state, also on commercial property and also on homeowners. So we have to recognize that when we have bills like that that come forward that maybe give relief to a certain demographic, that shift doesn't just disappear and those taxes get reduced and people pay less money. Somebody else is picking up the bill for that, and it's going to be all the other ag producers, homeowners, and commercial property owners.
What is maybe the answer then for ranchers who feel like they're kind of hung out to dry when it comes to that?
Well, what we have done is we have dedicated more personnel within the Department of Revenue to go out and to train assessors and make sure that assessors are using the tools that they have. Every assessor in each county has the ability to take into account different geographical challenges, topography, land that is too rocky to farm, to dig up, what really the challenges are with rainfall and moisture. So those tools are all available at the county level. In some counties, assessors haven't been using those tools. We've been trying to push them more, but remember, all these property taxes stay local. And that is a county decision. And so our ability to go out there and to dictate how they do that is not realistic, but we can certainly give them instruction on the tools that are available to them in statute.
So ranchers can bring that.
Absolutely, and many ranchers, if ranchers feel, and this is something I worked on when I was in the legislature. I was one of the key people that helped work on our property tax system while I was here in 2007 through 2010. And as a rancher and as a farmer, I recognize that land can be very different, and the ability to assess what the value of that land is can't be determined just on soil type. That's why those tools are in statute, was so assessors could use them to make adjustments. Ranchers can appeal, so if they think their taxes are too high on that property, they can appeal that to their county and get a decision that's different and make their case and question those assessors and the adjustments that may or may not be made. So I would encourage them to do that. You know, and many times doing something blanket, statewide, or even in one county from the legislature makes it more of an unfair system than really fixing the problem.
Governor, can you speak to the natural immunity exemption and the exemption bill that's kind of embedded in there?
Sure.
Do you think that sends a message that that sort of antibodies, natural immunity, is as effective as the vaccine? And if so, is that a problem?
Not at all. I think it says that studies show and research shows that antibodies are helpful, and typically most of the studies back up the 6-month threshold, and we're giving that as a tool for people to use as well as the religious and medical exemptions. Bob?
Governor, what's your position on Medicaid expansion? And second part of the question is, how do you see that fitting into the campaigns this fall for the various candidates?
Well, I think it's wise for people to understand the different details of what Medicaid expansion is. It's opening up a program to more people, a higher population with higher incomes. The vast majority of that population are able-bodied adults, and they are individuals that currently are out there working, and it's giving them the opportunity to have their health care covered by the taxpayers. So the reality is that as governor, I look at the costs of it. The projections for the first year are in the $40 million approximately. Second year up over $60 million to the state of South Dakota. I also know from looking and talking with other states and how the impact of expansion hit them was that North Dakota's was 43% above what they had projected. Minnesota's cost came in 47% above what they had projected. So South Dakota should be ready that if they want to expand Medicaid and cover a population that is an able-bodied individual without dependents, that it will cost the state $60 to $80 million ongoing every year, and we got to figure out a way to pay for that.
So I take it from that you're against it.
I'm against it because it would, I mean, Bob, I feel like the reality of it is that we'd have to raise taxes. And these are not disabled individuals that would be covered. They're not single moms with kids. They're already covered by Medicaid. They're not people that have mental health challenges. They're already covered. All those individuals are already covered under our Medicaid program. This would be able-bodied adults that do not have dependent children. We're saying we're gonna pay their health care costs, and it would end up in raising taxes on South Dakotans in order to pay for that. I think there's better ways to get these folks higher paying jobs, get them into training so that they can get into careers where they have health care coverage, and that there's more options for us rather than raising taxes and putting more people on government programs.
Given that the various senators said that they think it's going to pass, how do you see that fitting into the candidates this fall?
Well, I mean, it'll be a discussion, but I think you know me, Bob, that I tell people what I believe in the facts, and I hope that they'll support me, but I also recognize that at least they know that with me, they've got a governor who will tell them the truth and won't shy away from a tough conversation.
Kyle Ireland, South Dakota Broadcasters. There is a statistic circulating around right now that 90% of South Dakota's LGBTQ community is diagnosed with either anxiety or depression. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. That makes me sad, and we should figure it out. Anything else? Okay. I did, didn't I? Well, yeah, there was a lot of analysis that went into that pick. So, thanks, guys. Thanks for being here.